Benjamin Franklin believed that education was literally for everybody, and Thomas Jefferson believed it was for the elite. Today, in our conversation on Simply Sarah, you're going to really enjoy all of this, and we're so grateful that you are here. I am super excited to share that we have Dr. Darin Detwiler again back with us. And today our conversation is fully about education. And Dr. Darin, you come with so much knowledge in this area. You started out in a one-room schoolhouse and you have taught in so many different places. I would love for you to share a bit of your background, a little bit about your thoughts on education, please.
Sure. Well, let's see. I was when I was in the Navy, I was on a submarine. I was a nuclear engineer, and part of my duties included uh, like department and division training. And it's very strange because here you're teaching your peers. It's not like you're a teacher teaching students. It's like you're a teacher teaching teachers, in a way, right? And after the military, I ultimately decided to go into kind of partly in industry and policy, but also in education. I, as you mentioned, I started off teaching for 4 years in a one-room schoolhouse. This was northwest of Seattle. This was an off-campus after school. I literally taught from 2:30 to 7:30 at night, and I had about 25 students each day. These are students who worked during the day. They had a child. There were other situations going on, and they fit well into this learning environment. And I literally taught all subjects, found ways to integrate different disciplines into activities, things of that nature. This was very much for at-risk students. After that, I ended up teaching for 8 years at a alternative high school closer to Seattle, and this was about 200 students in a traditional building that was its own campus. And I taught math and science, whereas I had previously taught all subjects. And here again, it was at risk special needs students. I had students who were in and out of incarceration, who had children who were paralyzed from the neck down, who had other situations that, for whatever reason, the traditional high school was not a good fit or was not even willing to work with them. I then went on to teach at a traditional middle school, seventh and eighth graders, but this time I was teaching talented and gifted students as well as general education students. Since then, I went on, I taught for about 5 years at a community college where I was teaching students who had graduated from high school, but they have cognitive disabilities, autism, Asperger's, and they wanted to continue on with their education. And so an undergrad degree, an associate's degree program was created for this population. And after that, I ended up where I am now. I'm a full-time associate teaching professor at Northeastern University in Boston, and I teach predominantly graduate students, although I do teach occasional doctoral courses. And these are students who are in industry in most cases. I teach a lot of international students, military students. A typical class I teach online, and one of my typical classes may have students in Switzerland, Germany, Japan, Mexico City, El Salvador, California, Boston, and all points in between. And along the way, I also served 4 years as an assistant dean, where I focused on quality assurance of instruction and supporting instructors. And I think lastly, important to note that one of my bachelor's degrees is in education. My master's degree is in curriculum and instruction development for online learners, which was weird because this was really well before we had online learning like we have today. And my doctorate is in law and policy. And somehow all this comes together between my science background, my teaching background, my academic background, my industry background, and my law and policy background. background that really helps me in the classroom in a lot of diverse, challenging needs.
I really believe that we bring who we are as educators, fully who we are, with all of our experiences into the classroom, even if there are parts of our life where we're like, "Oh, I'll never talk about, you know, living in the sequoias and next to um, Yosemite Sierra, this Yosemite area." And yet, at some point in a classroom, in a dialogue, in a conversation, these pieces come up. And so we're able to weave them in. And as I think about the community, that what we call education, we have definitely the parents, even in graduate school, the parents and grandparents have some type of presence, whether or not the student in front of you is actually in connection or communication with them. You know, we carry in our DNA who we are, and so the experiences of people who have been before us are going to be carried throughout in some respect. So we have that. We have definitely administration being part of this picture. We have government policy definitely also being part of the picture. The students who are in front of us are the ones that we are connecting in with the most at that point, whether it's online or in person. There's the staff, if you're in person, you have the custodial as well, who makes such an important contribution to what's taking place in the classroom. All these different facets, the publishers, the people who are creating the curriculum, the people who are thinking about how the curriculum should be created and going out and sourcing all those different pieces. It truly is a full village of people who are working to move this conversation forward. And sometimes we're working together, and sometimes it feels like we aren't working together as much. In your online classes, what are the things that you have found to be, because you have people who are in vastly different time zones, that brings them together so that when they are with you, they are truly with you, Dr. Darin, and that they are having their minds opened?
I find as you're asking this question, I find that uh, my obvious answer is that there are certain things that I've had to incorporate. It doesn't even matter what I teach, right? Because when we teach, there's content and there's process. There's the
Yes.
content we teach and there's a process we go about teaching it. And with that process, we have to remember that whether the student is 26 or 62 or 16 or 6, whether they are in your city or in another state or in another country, they're still humans.
Yes.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that we have to take care of, food, water, sleep, breathing. We have to take care of security and health. And then we start taking care of the social element before we can start talking about esteem and self-actualization and those elements there. So even in an online learning environment, it's still a classroom. It's still a learning environment. It's not an excuse to just uh, have a website that students go to and they do what they're told to do, and you type things back and forth and emails and you know just read what I said you are supposed to read, just answer what I said you're supposed to answer, kind of a thing. It has to be a learning environment. It has to be a learning environment, even in an online sense, in which students feel welcome, they feel safe and secure. And I know one might say, if it's an online learning environment, how can they not feel safe, not feel secure? Very much so. The attitudes, the belief, the communication, the acceptance, the language that is used, the examples that are used, everything in this learning environment should be there to support their success, to support their engagement, to support their feeling of being included in a learning environment that they want to be included in. And this sometimes takes on very interesting elements. Yes, sure, we can be effective and efficient and maximize each minute of online time, all that kind of stuff. But even as you and I are sitting here, right? Um, it's this is like deja vu, because this could be like one of my classroom environments, and it's like yeah, I might have that conversation. Oh, Sarah, I see your cat behind you. What's your cat's name? Oh, very cool, very cool. Kind of a thing. Or wow, that's an incredible background behind you. Where is that? Um, Even something as simple as that. I mean, I have students who are parents that they're like, I want to make sure my kid's out of the room, or whatever. It's like, that's okay. I have other parents that are like, oh, hey, my daughter wants to say hi. And I'll be like, oh, hi, how are you? How are you? How is, your mommy's in class? Are you in class too? At school or whatever. It's these little things that it's like, it's still part of being human. It's still part of the idea of the experience, the engagement, and students want to do this. I have students. So um, even if students are there live, not all students, because of time zones, like you mentioned, can be there live. So I record all of our, I call them live virtual class meetings.
Yes.
So if you cannot attend live, you can watch a recording of it. I have students who attend live and then still go and watch the recording of it, because they say they don't want to get bogged down in taking notes and feeling like they're getting lost. They really want to be there and just experience, be in the moment, and then they'll go back and watch it and take notes if they need to, kind of a situation. Even when I taught hybrid classes where I'd have students physically in front of me, but I would record it for those students who couldn't be there. I had students who were there in the classroom on main campus in Boston, who said that they still went and watched the recording of our class lecture. Um, Another element that I think is important is that I may be the instructor, but I am not the only source of information. So yeah, on one side of it, I say, look, students, you should never cite me. A lecture is nothing you should cite as a source,
Yeah.
because in a way, it's like, it's almost like cliff notes. If
Yes.
your audience remembers those,
No,
why cite the cliff notes of Shakespeare's, play, when you could cite the actual play, right? Um, and but at the same time, I bring guest lectures into my classroom, even if it's a live person that joins in and talks with us. It could be someone from government, someone from industry, someone from London, someone from New York, whatever it is. Sometimes they're live, sometimes they're pre recorded, but bringing these perspectives, bringing these diverse voices, diverse faces, whether it's a woman who's half my age, a man who's older than me, someone with a perspective from another country, another culture. Uh, um, um, you know, I am just one perspective, and if my students only see that one perspective on these issues, then they're not getting a full exposure to what are some of the issues out there. So by bringing in diverse voices, I believe also helps make sure that even if a student thinks I'm a great instructor, but I don't look like them, or I don't even look close to them, I want to make sure that I bring in diverse voices, whether it's male, female, black, white, old, young, US, international, senior level leadership, junior level, career entry level. I want to make sure that the students are exposed to those diverse voices, to which they may relate more to one than another, but it's better than assuming that they only need to have one.
Yes. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I also want to go back to your point about process and content. I know as when I was teaching second grade, particularly, I came to this huge aha. And by this point, I had been teaching for more than 20 years. I just discovered that if I came into the school year and set up what the process was going to be, yes, we would do other things along the way, but take them out for if the fire bell happens to go off, the fire drill, this is where we go and this is the process of it. When we leave for lunch, this is our process of doing that. When we come in the morning, this is our process. After recess, this is our process. Those kinds of things, of being able to talk about that. And then also part of, for me of being a classroom teacher was reading aloud to the students. And I didn't want to record my voice. I didn't want to have that pre-done. I wanted it to be in person. And if the kids wanted to put their head on their desk and fall asleep, that was fine. If they wanted to lay on the floor and whatever, that was going to be, as long as we were all in there participating, understanding, particularly at the beginning of the school year, that after a summer of getting to play and do things when you want to, coming into this space and this time took some adjustment. And that was why it's okay to take a nap if you want to while I'm reading. I think it's a great story. However, if this is where you need to take a break, I get it. And then for me, when you have that process set up and they understand the expectations or what the community is going to be, then the idea of the content coming in, it just becomes much more of a flow of this is the information that we need to learn together or that you are here to be exposed to. And I love your concept of bringing in so many different versions of being able to say the same thing, because it really, I think, opens up the door for cognition, but also opens up a door for connection. And I think that that's really where the place of learning connects in our brain as well. One of the elementary schools that I taught at that was such an incredible place was that we had music and art, and then we did this thing called Science Festival, Arts and Science Day in addition. And that we had people from all over the community come in, bring their expertise, things that they love to do, whether it happened to be crafting. My favorite was always in my room, we had somebody who was a gemologist who would come in and bring all kinds, and he had his doctorate in it and would talk about the different stratospheres and all that. So if you wanted to do more of balloon kind of stuff, if you wanted to do more, balloon making into animals or something like that, you could go learn these things, kind of pushing into the Ben Franklin idea of let's just expose, right? Let's just have a whole bunch of different kinds of pieces of information out there and letting people choose and pull in what suits them and fits for them in that particular place. But also with that, then they got all these different people on campus who typically weren't on campus unless they were invited to come in to actually be there and to be able to share what they know. When you invite people in and they are guest lecturers, are you looking for people who have published and therefore your students can go read their information or gather, read their books and that kind of thing? Or are you looking for more of a specific look into the industry, or how do you source your people?
Well, first off, I feel very fortunate in that I have an incredibly large connection of people outside of the classroom, the university
Yes.
environment. I speak at national conferences. I work with the USDA, the FDA, with international stakeholders, industry folks, and in fact, very shortly here, in a few days, I'm off to go on a speaking tour based on some of my books,
Awesome.
where I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks, and a lot of that is in front of major national organizations and companies. And so I bring a lot of these, my contacts, my networks into this. Yeah, there are definitely going to be some people who maybe they did a TED talk, maybe they did an interview for another podcast webinar. But a lot of times, I mean, I've had people who, I remember one guy, he was a director of a farm initiative on Martha's Vineyard, off the coast of Massachusetts, and it was all about sustainability and how they were working through the pandemic. And this guy had never done, he never published anything, never been, much on, podcasts, webinars, that kind of stuff. But he really brought a good, diverse perspective to a lot of the challenges they were dealing with. And I was able to interview him literally at his farm. Some of it was sitting on his tractor, some of it was in the field, and most of the time, no offense here, but most of the time, our our guests or my guests are in a very their office or a virtual background.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that was very cool. There was another guest that came to mind. She was in her at the time she was in her late 20s, early 30s, and she was the sustainable or sustainability director for the city of Long Beach. She
Mhm.
went on to become the sustainability expert. I don't remember the exact title, but for the state of California. And the feedback I got from my students, and this is important, by the way, the feedback I got from the students is that many of them had no idea this job even existed. I had no idea that a person could do this kind of a job. How did she get to this position? She's so young, kind of a thing, right? And good, bravo for her. Now she's working for the state level here. Asking students feedback, not only in terms of like, what do you know about this subject? What questions do you have for our guest? And after we have our guest, whether it's live or pre-recorded, what did you learn from the guest? But at the end of the course, I ask students, what was some of their big takeaways? How did these guests support their success, their learning in the environment in this course? And what stood out from them? And what was missing? What is something that they wish that they had as a guest? This feedback from my students has so helped me in terms of, okay, I need to have someone from this, or I need to think about that. I remember one year, um, I had guests from Scotland, England, Dubai, and Germany. And at the end of the course, two students said it really wasn't international and diverse. I'm like, how could this be, right? So I literally, the next year, I had like this, imagine like a clock, right? With the 12, 1, 2, 3, etc. I had all of the guests that were going to be speaking in the course. And I had like their name, what their topic was, maybe what their title was, and a little teeny thumbnail, their picture. But I took a little teeny flag of their nation and put it, down here or whatever,
Yes.
Canada, Germany, whatever it was, right? Just
Right.
to re-emphasize, because sometimes my perception is, well, clearly they're diverse,
Right.
clearly
Literally.
they're international,
Yes.
but that's not necessarily what your student's perspective is. So I put their face so they can see the diversity, because a name by itself does not scream diversity in most cases. And I put the flag there. And I think it's like, look, even for me as an instructor, it's a process where I am adjusting to, I'm reflecting on my 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 own activities, but I'm also taking into consideration my students' feedback and what works, what doesn't work. And it doesn't mean that I change everything. It doesn't mean that I listen to every idea from the students, kind of a thing. But it does put me in a situation where if I go into teaching as it's not just a process for my students, it's also a process for me,
Yes.
then it becomes something that I'm also invested in terms of being a part of the learning environment.
Right.
And sometimes we lose that. You mentioned something earlier that I want to reflect on I want to pick up on as well. So I had a student many, many, many years ago, paralyzed from the neck down, and had a para ed. And this is a science class. And we're, the scientific method and writing a science lab paper. And I couldn't really, I didn't have a good feel for, well, how much of it is the students writing, the students' knowledge, and how much of it is the influence of the para ed,
Right.
right?
Right.
So what I did, do you remember what Mad Libs are? Kind
Yes.
of fill in the blank things.
Yes.
So I basically made up a Mad Lib. I took a model template for a perfect paragraph, if you will, for an introduction for a science lab. You know, I wonder how blank is
Yes.
impacted, independent variable is
Yes.
impacted by direct variable,
Right.
given a situation where, and so it was like a Mad Lib. So now it wasn't so much the organization and the construct of the para ed, it was the student being able to identify these items and fill, and then make sure these blanks are filled.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. But then some of the other students who were not physically challenged were like, I could use that as well. Could I use that? And I'm like, okay, sure, right? Because it helped them form a perfect paragraph.
Yes.
I then went on to teaching talented and gifted students in US history.
Mhm.
And there was this moment where it's like, you should be taking notes on this, right? And yeah, I took some notes. And as any parent knows, if you tell your kid to clean their room, there's a difference between when they say, I'm done and my room is clean. Right?
Yes.
Same thing with taking notes.
Yeah.
I'm done versus I've taken all the notes, right? So I transitioned this kind of worksheet approach into this graphic organizer that's like name, period, date, topic, who, what, when, why significant, cause and effect, change and
Yes.
continuity kind of questions, right? And
Yes.
so there was these little boxes for students to write in, but it wasn't so much about I wrote 2 pages of notes as much as it is, do you have the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, the change, continuity, all that kind of stuff? Because this really helped, pull it all together. And so I taught my students, my general education students and my special education students and my talented and gifted students
Yes.
processes. But
Yes.
have you ever been involved with IEP 504s?
Yes. Many times.
I remember going to a meeting. This is right before I stopped being a public school teacher,
Mhm.
where it was an IEP 504 meeting for a student. There's the student in the room, all the teachers, and the parent and an administrator. And the math teacher, she was saying how little Johnny in his 8th grade math class doesn't take notes.
Mhm.
And she went on and on and on about what he does and doesn't do in class, but kept talking about taking notes. And I turned to the teacher, and I'm sure this wasn't very popular, but I'm in the room in this situation. And I turned to the teacher and I asked, did you ever teach the students how to take notes in your math class? And she goes, no. And I said, I don't even know how I would take notes in a math class. How you expect an 8th grader to know how to take notes in a math class? Now, I did follow it up by helping, kind of taking what I was doing in my history class
Right.
and turn that into a math note taker sheet, like, you know
Yes.
this is multiplication. This is specifically multiplication of fractions. We have the denominator and the numerator, and then
Yes.
here's what you do, and then here's a practice question, kind of, or a practice example, and here's working through that example. And all of a sudden, now this teacher was able to have this on hand for students to help them take notes. But again, we sometimes assume the
Yes.
processes are somehow miraculously available in our students. And I think that this is going back to your very opening statement. Education is for all, or education is just for the elite. Should we want to make sure that all individuals have the processes to be able to
Yes.
learn, whether it be learn independently or learn in a institution of higher education or whatever it is, because there's so many other processes we expect them to engage in life as an
Yes.
adult. And we have to keep in mind that perhaps education is not just a reflection of where they are,
Mhm.
where our students are in their current world, but
Right.
perhaps education should take into mind this kind of ideal future situation for them, for their lot in life, their career, or their, where they could go on to, because we don't know.
Mhm.
We don't know, is this person going to be a brilliant scientist or a brilliant artist, or a legislator, or whatever it is in the military. We want to make sure that our students are able to, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, truly be able to achieve their highest level of needs in terms of self-actualization. We don't want to do anything that closes doors. We might not know which door they ultimately go through, but we should never be that individual who closed some of those doors for our students.
I so firmly believe in what you're saying because um, they come to us we're almost like artists in education, where we have these beautiful canvases in front of us with all the different types of paints and colors and those kinds of things. And to be able to say these don't go together on a canvas, I think is really limiting. And um, I know that for myself, I'm a musician and have taught music the last decades. And when I met my husband, I said something to him about singing, and he goes, "No, I listen to music, but I don't really sing." And I was like, "Everybody sings, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I tried to sing in middle school, and the choir teacher told me I didn't have a good voice, and so I stopped singing." And still today, he'll sing, but I think that he has a voice that he could really sing if he wanted to. And she was doing the best that she could at that time. And so I'm not faulting her, but I'm just saying about closing those doors. um, if we can be opening them, and I think also emotionally, um, giving them a safe place, but in that safe place, being able to talk about when hard things happen in life, because they're going to happen. And how do we then choose to continue to move forward, continue to use Maslow's hierarchy, continue to embrace that we know that we're moving towards a goal, and yet we have come across some things that have been challenges along the way. And is it okay to stop for a moment? Do we need to keep pushing through? And I think learning some of those internal conversations, but just having, again, multiple voices talking about, I got to this point, but it wasn't necessarily point A to point B, a straight line. That would have been nice, but some other things in life took place. And I love that you were able to teach at the community college for students who had finished their GED, and that you guys created a program for them to be able to have skills that they needed to go on and live lives that were fulfilling for them. And I think that that's something that I would love for us to be teaching that. And I would love for us to be teaching I don't know how to say this, the financial part about life, about if you have $1 and you spend $1.05, there's an issue here with what you're spending, and just a basic checkbook kind of idea. And I realize that that's very, very old school talking about checkbooks, but just being able to make logical decisions based on knowledge that a person has, and perhaps having people that they can go seek wisdom from, counsel from, in that process as well.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the community college experience I had, because these were students who, in many cases, they, well, there were some who graduated with their class, but
Mhm.
because of their special education needs, they were allowed to stay in public school until they were 21.
Right.
And um, going back to the IEP 504, the special education considerations, there's a big difference between accommodation and what I was typically seeing with these students.
Yes.
Accommodation is, we're going to do this to help the student achieve this. We're going to say that they
Mhm.
can pass the class if they do these things. We identified this. Here's the support they need. Here's a modification we're going to do. Here's what they're going to do to support this. Too
Mhm.
many times in public schools, and especially in high schools, though, we can find examples of teachers who say, look, I teach this civics class and I'm not going to change what I do for this one student.
Not deviating.
Right.
Didn't
I'm
before,
not
not
going
going
to
to now.
deviate,
Yeah.
yes, because of X, Y, and Z. And so it shifts from accommodation to elimination. The majority of these undergrad students in this course, uh, when I talked with them, because I end up becoming a program developer with some of the courses in this, we're talking about finances and voting. The fact that as an adult, their biggest freedom is the ability to spend money on their own,
Right.
to be part of a functioning society, contributing to society, having a job, paying taxes,
Yes.
and to be able
Mhm.
to vote. And yet, they were allowed to graduate without taking a government or civics class, or be given an opportunity to take a class that focuses on finances and anything about economics. And they felt as if it was, in this case it could be 2-3 years after they graduated from high school, that they were essentially robbed of the most important parts of their learning process to help them be a part of their community. And this is the most valuable thing to not just this population, but to many populations, right? If
Yes.
you don't have the tools to be a functioning, contributing, successful member of your community, you're considered an outsider. No one
Yes.
wants to be an outsider like that.
Yeah.
And so we would teach these courses. I taught courses and developed courses, and brought in opportunities where we looked at not only our government but comparative world governments.
Mhm.
We looked at religion, we looked at economics, we looked at so many different things that these students had such a desire and I'll even say demand for, because they were denied that opportunity in school. So again, this whole idea of, we may never know how many doors we can open for students, but we should always be mindful of trying to minimize the doors we shut for our
Yes.
students.
Yes. And I love also how you talk about, even if you're teaching online, that process of seeing the full person there as much as they're going to share with you. And yes, there is the content to get to, but if we don't have those connections, if we haven't found those ways of being able to be human together, I think it really dilutes the whole educational process. And I do understand that there are boxes to check, right? So when you go get your driver's license, you need to learn this information, this content, and be able to pass this test in order to be able to take the driving test. So there is this, I just am here for the content part of it, right? The driving, being able to have the license at the end is what the end goal is, that freedom, the opportunity to be able to do that. And so for sometimes there just is this checkbox kind of feeling. And yet, I think that when I have had, um, my first driver's ed teacher was a high school. In high school, we did it in summertime, and he took out all of the orange little cones outside, but we couldn't get behind the wheel until we had listened to his stories and heard him talk about driving, and whether it was driving a semi truck or driving a car, whether it was on ice or it was a dry, all these different things. He selected the best stories that he knew to help us understand the content in front of us. And by doing that, then when we finally got behind the wheel, yes, my hands were still sweaty. And yes, he had the brake on his side where he could do the braking kind of a thing as well. But yet we learned how to drive in part because we were connected and we trusted him. And he had figured out ways in order to trust us as absolute newbies for some of us in terms of driving. That connection is critical.
And we don't necessarily know those connections or the impact of those connections.
True.
Um, I have so many different stories, but a couple very, very quick highlights. Um, I have had many military veterans and even current active duty military students. Um, a number of years ago, I would teach these classes where I'd have an online component and an on-ground component, and I had students physically in the room, and yet the cameras and the projector, all that kind of stuff, students can log in from anywhere. And there was a student who was a Navy pilot in Afghanistan who would join us. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning for him or something like that. And he would only join in for 20, 15, 20 minutes or whatever. Seriously, at 1 o'clock in the morning kind of a deal. But it
Yeah.
was important to him because he felt so isolated and disconnected, and that this was a way that technology can actually give him that connection. I've had I've had the mom who was going back to school, felt guilty about um like she was a single mom with a teenage daughter. I think maybe she was 12 or something like that. And yet I did this thing where I was on a speaking tour and going some conferences and meetings, and I filmed like introductions to my units all around Europe. Like there was a little welcome to our unit on this, and then there's like
Yes.
Stonehenge behind me, or
Love it.
well, let's
Yes.
look at this in terms of the EU, and we're looking at the
Building.
British
Yes.
Parliament or whatever it was, right?
Right.
This teacher, I'm sorry, this student at the end of the course said, my daughter every week wanted to come, and it was like, where's Professor Detwiler this week? Where's he going to introduce this video from? And it became this moment between mother and daughter about this idea of, I don't know, I can't wait until Monday. We'll get to see where our professor is talking from.
Yes.
I had a student who already had her doctorate, but was changing her career, was getting a master's degree in a specific area. And She goes, I feel so guilty, but I want to thank you. I'm like, okay, I really want to hear what you have to say about this.
Right.
She goes, I am always a team leader. Every class, I'm always a team leader. I'm so thankful I was not a team leader in your course, because I finally got to experience what it's like to be a member of a team and not be
Yes.
the team leader. But that same quarter, there was another student who was like always had their camera off. Like it was always like like the first letter or initial, their first initial, or it was a meme, shadow, whatever,
Right.
avatar. And this student I had being a team leader The student thanked me profusely for doing this and got into it. And about halfway through the course, he was so proud of being the team leader that all of a sudden now his camera was on, and he exposed uh, some vulnerabilities in being a team leader, and along with his appreciation and his um, uh, um, again, his vulnerabilities. But I thought it was interesting that once he was given this opportunity to take on this different role, all of a sudden now he was visible in the classroom. We
Yes.
don't know how these little decisions may have a lifelong impact on someone, whether they're in Afghanistan or a single mom or someone who's tired of always being assumed as being, taking on this responsibility, or who was never allowed to take on a responsibility in the classroom. And all these experiences, again, are all, even just in online learning environments, the
Yes.
reason why understanding the processes as well as the content
Mhm.
and the learning environment as a whole becomes, in a way, this bigger picture that is so much more than just the content itself.
So, so, so true. And those human connections are the part that carry us forward. That the mother and the daughter being able to 20 years from now look back and talk about, hey, I saw the tenacity that you had, mom, finishing up that class. The 12-year-old may not be able to say that and just enjoy the moment of where's, Professor Detwiler going to be this week. But yet later on, the conversations that they can have about that and how you that take her taking that class, her having the making the decision that she was going to follow through on a lifelong dream, even though all the different things, and she chose to have that perseverance and move through. These are things that we can only teach by example. Yes, we can read stories about perseverance, but when you watch somebody do that, it changes everything. And for the other people in your class, when the person who was taking classes from there at 1 o'clock in the morning, even only coming for maybe 15 minutes, that changes how other people feel about being able to be there in person the whole time. I mean, now you have a connection to somebody who is serving, and that we get to have these freedoms here. What a radical difference that makes for me in terms of how I show up in class then, because now I want to make sure I'm there for those 15 minutes, and I want to make sure that I'm giving the best and I'm getting the best and including in all those different kinds of pieces. And I think that the part also about having people have their cameras off and giving them that freedom and then having them be seen. I shared with somebody this week how grateful that I was that she saw me. And it was somebody that I've been walking life with for probably about 15 years. And I was actually reflecting back on something that happened maybe 10 years ago. And those just words just tumbled out of my mouth. You saw me, and I'm so grateful that you held me accountable at that point and helped me to see how other people maybe were seeing me in this place of education. And such an important piece and an important part. And I would imagine with technology that you have this opportunity that you gift all of your students to be able to stay in contact with you. And I think that part of that is, yes, because of the level that you work in government and the policies that you have helped to craft at the very, very highest levels. So people are going to be interested in that because of the connection into power that you are and that you have, but they're also your vulnerability of being able to come back on this show. At the end of our last conversation, we had turned off the recording and you said, hey, I see that you're an educator. Let's have a conversation about that. That's life changing. I mean, how amazing that you are multifaceted, but that you're also willing to share your time with this audience again on such an important conversation, important topic. In this space, as you get ready to go travel for 3 weeks and sharing internationally, what is the one piece after the process? What's the one piece of content that you want people to walk away with? And it can be industry specific if you want to share that. But I would just love to hear. I know that you travel and do this where you could choose to do it pre-recorded, you could choose to do it virtual, and yet you are making the sacrifice and making the decision to be there in person. So what do that you want them to be getting from that?
Well, here's here's what's interesting. for me, in terms of why I want to, here's what draws me into being an educator.
Mm.
I look at the idea of, if I can explain something to someone, if I can help someone come to the point where they understand something better, and if I can create more situations where there's not the answers on page 172, but perhaps the value is not in the answer, the value is in the process of you going towards this. A lot of what I teach, it's amazing how there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, there's wrong ways of getting about an answer, right? But when you're focusing on case studies and thesis work, or other things similar to that, there really is no, necessarily here is the answer. And that was an experience I got with when I was teaching those talented and gifted students for those years, they always, well, what is the answer, or what is the right answer? And it was frustrating to them when it was like, well, there's no right answer. There was an activity where we took like we had the government, with the government element of the U.S. history class, and they would talk about the Constitution and the Articles and the Bill of Rights and that kind of stuff, and we would kind of go through it and learn it. And yes, there were quizzes and stuff in the book, but I would give them these big sheets of paper, and I took all of the words, all the key words, and like earlier in the week they had a worksheet where here's the word and they had to put the definitions.
The vocabulary. Yes.
Yeah. But then I would give them at the end of the week these huge sheets of construction paper, and they'd be put in teams, and they had to do like a corporate organizational flow chart. Because of course I had to teach them what an organizational flow chart is, and we showed them some, the leader, the president, the vice president, or the owner of the company, the vice president of the company, the COO, or whatever it was, right? I even looked. We had an incident command chart for the school, right? Let's say there was a fire, right? Well, there's the principal, and there's the communications, and the secretary would do this, or the,
Yes.
who would do the triage center, and who would do this kind of stuff. And so it's like, here's a real world select scenario that's going on in our school right now. And so the students would have essentially uh, the words, some scissors, some rulers, pencils, and Elmer's glue sticks or whatever, and they'd be put into these groups, and they'd have to make, and they couldn't look at the other teams, right?
Right.
They had to make like a map of this, and then at the end of the period, I think it was actually 2 periods, at the end of the second period, they would show finally to the rest of the class their organizational flow chart. But the thing was, they had to draw the lines between the words, and they had to explain on the word, on the line, like how is it
The
connected?
connection. Yes.
Yeah, like is responsible for, or is a condition of, or whatever it was, right? And so they showed these, and they all looked so incredibly different. Some would look like Christmas trees, some look like snowflakes, some look like very linear, very, very horizontal or whatever kind of a thing. And so, okay, so which one's right? Well, they're all right. Well, how do you grade me if what's the right answer? How do you grade me? It wasn't important what the final product was. What was important is you were engaged in
Yes.
this process, and there was arguing. And I remember even other teachers were like, why are they being so noisy in there? How can they be learning? This is learning.
Yes.
This is learning. They're arguing, they're debating. Yes, I mean, it's a controlled, eighth grader learning environment. You can't yell and throw things or whatever, but when you have a girl who's like, no, this is connected to this, not this. That's what I wanted. I wanted this, do this. I was just yesterday at a local university and exploring the new science labs, and um, they have Friday coffee lab, which sounds kind of weird, but here's the deal. They had this lab where there was someone, one of the professors, and I think someone from the community, they were talking about the science of coffee, how coffee was roasted, how coffee was preserved, how coffee was made, all this kind of stuff. And they would bring all, as a free opportunity, you got to drink coffee, and all these students would come in, because it was like first come, first serve, because I think they had a cap of like 18 students or something like that. And the woman that was showing me around was like, every single week it is full. And she goes, and this is what I love the most. Anything we can do to invite people in to voluntarily be exposed to science in areas they never would have thought of is a win. And if it means that we have to have the science of coffee, it's a win. If it means we have to have the science of pizza, it's a win. If it means that we have to, you know,
Yes.
have 3D printing of a Christmas ornament, you know, and people want to come and try it, it's a win. And it's like so cool, the idea of that value of inviting people to be excited and engaged. That's
Yes.
what was going on when the students were debating over the
Yes.
organizational flow chart of the you know, of the Constitution. So much better than a quiz and right, wrong, 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 right, right. No one wants to have a red X next to their answer. They'd rather be engaged in that idea of what is the construct in their, you know, in their mind of what this is or should or could look like, and the things we take for granted, whether it's the Constitution or coffee, um, but to be actively encouraged to be engaged in this process, that, I mean, it's like a gift, you
Yes.
know? And when I can do that in areas that relate to my mission, and if you watched our first interview, it's entirely
Right.
around food safety. So I talk about sustainable development. I talk about social and sustainable entrepreneurship. I talk about corporate social responsibility. I talk about global economics of food and agriculture. There's so many things that are all, you know, encompassing of the world of understanding the world of food, and our global food supply system, and to invite students into this conversation about this, to me, not only does that satisfy what appeals to me in terms of being an educator, but it satisfies my life mission in terms of focusing on more on these issues, because I look at my students as future decision makers, as
Yes.
future leaders, as future people who are advocates and
Mhm.
um, you know, the ones that are essentially going to be making future policy and future decisions that are going to keep me and other people safe.
Mhm.
And so, why not bringing them into this world where they feel welcomed and they feel fulfilled and they feel that there is a reason for them to understand this? And I think too that underlining all this has to come with the idea of the why behind it.
Thank you. Yes.
If we don't have the why behind it, and I was a math and science teacher, and in math, me, believe me, wait, why are we learning how to do this? Why are we learning how to do this equation? Why are we learning how to solve this way, kind of a thing? Um, if you can't explain the why, then what's the purpose of teaching it, right? There's got
Right.
to be a real world need
Mhm.
for teaching this,
Yes.
um, and it has to go beyond the idea of, well, because what if you go into higher levels of math? That's not the why.
No, it isn't.
So we have to be very clear and capable of communicating the why behind what we do.
I know that the majority of people, at least learners in America, are very visual, taking their information very visually. And, you know, some are auditory, some are kinesthetic. But I think that one of the gifts of having students work together in groups and not be able to see each other's work and to be able to have lively conversations is that moves us from how we take the information in, whether it happens to be visually or auditorily or kinesthetically, and allows us to have that iron sharpens iron. And so inside of that then becomes these conversations of, ooh, in my mind, this all works together and it's super easy and I can see the flow of it. But yet for somebody else, they're going to see it differently because they come from a different background or that they have had a different experience. And so to be able to play with that and to be able to work with that. And I think also it helps us then to be able to really flesh out vocabulary. I was recently, somebody said to me, you know, solitary is not the same thing as solitude. And I kind of went, huh,
Mhm.
well, what's solitude? Because I've always thought about solitude as being that you're alone. And so that just helped me again, that vocabulary piece of what is it? What's the difference between the two of those? Do you have to be by yourself in order to have solitude, or can you do that with a group of people? Solitary would be like if you're playing the game, you're playing by yourself, right? And so being able to flesh out the vocabulary. And as we continue to be very, very international world where we are rubbing shoulders. I mean, it just is happening all the different ways. Understanding the context and being able to come to a place of understanding what the person's actually communicating, I think is so important. And that having these conversations just drives it forward.
There's an example that was recently brought to my attention. I've used this now for a while. I teach a lot of students for whom English is their second language, or they grew up in a different culture, or they're just of a different age group, kind of a deal. And sometimes you see those videos of a 15-year-old today trying to figure out how to operate a rotary dial telephone, or what is an
Yes.
8-track tape, kind of a deal. So the example, I laugh at this because it's so. Why didn't I ever think about this? And I'm going to say two phrases that don't sound like we should talk about them in many audiences, but do you know what it means to butt dial someone, right?
Right.
Do you know what a booty call is?
Ah,
Think about someone who can't figure out the difference, because if you think about it, they're kind of the same. Butt
you're right.
dial, booty call.
Yes.
Completely different context, completely different meanings, but
Yes.
it's like, it's this realization that the nuances are so obvious if you're in the know. But imagine
Yeah.
trying to talk with someone, trying to be an instructor. And so here's where it comes to the instructor, especially if you've got students from different languages and cultures. You got to pick your examples. You got to pick even your storytelling, right?
Right.
um, if I'm telling a story about you know, let's say I'm telling a story, I'm relating everything to baseball. Well,
Mhm.
that's great for the students who understand the game of baseball.
Right.
That's a beautiful thing for me, is everyone, when I relate things to food, everyone understands food, right?
Right.
But if I relate everything to baseball or to cars or to, I use examples like, 8-track cassette tapes or something like that, right? You're going to lose part of your audience. One of the things that always has always been an eye opener for me is when I go from writing to hosting podcasts to teaching online or on ground courses to standing in front of audiences, whether it's an industry association or a corporation or whatever the group is. That idea of finding the common denominator in terms of what is the context that people will understand, what is the way to engage my audience,
Yes.
because what I use to engage one audience is not necessarily what I can use to engage the next audience. And it almost becomes, I focus, like, I know the content,
Right.
but I spend more time focusing on how I'm going to engage my audience than
Yes.
I do focusing on the content.
Yes.
And my wife gets that earful of me. What if I start off talking like, what if I start off with this
Yeah.
example, whatever? I was in Dallas earlier this year, and one of my, uh, this was a major organization, and they had people from Kentucky, like the majority of the people were from Kentucky Fried Chicken, but from all over the world, like all the
Yes.
leaders. And there was Taco Bell, and there's a couple other restaurants. But the night before my keynote speech, and when I was doing this workshop, my wife, I was talking with her on the phone. She goes, "Wait, didn't you say you're talking to the people from Kentucky Fried Chicken?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You should start off by telling your coleslaw story." I'm like, "Oh, yes, this is the perfect audience, because how many times am I ever going to be able to tell this audience, or tell the story in front of an audience?" And essentially, when I was growing up, family reunions, family gatherings, whatever, my grandmother made the best coleslaw in the world, and that was always the most memorable thing for me. One year, we had to pick up my grandma and take her, drive her to the thing. We had to do a pit stop, and I was like 8, 9, 10 years old or something like that. And ultimately, she gets out of the car, gets something out of the trunk, goes inside someplace, comes back, and then it hit me. I realized what was going on. She brought a big old bowl of Tupperware, like that big green bowl with the
Yes.
white lid, took it
Yes.
into Kentucky Fried Chicken for them to fill it up with their coleslaw. And she was bringing that to our family
I
gatherings and
love it.
basically selling it as, not selling it,
Right.
conveying to everyone that that's her coleslaw. And
Yes.
of course, and then I'm like, so thank you, Kentucky Fried Chicken, for ruining my childhood. And I had the audience was just laughing and laughing. It was a great 8 o'clock in the morning,
You bet.
international audience, icebreaker kind of a thing. I can't do that in front of many other audiences.
No.
But my same approach to education, right? When I'm teaching seventh or eighth graders, where I'm teaching high school students of all ages, if I can't have fun with them, if I can't engage them, if I can't bring them in and connect them and create a moment of curiosity for them to want to ask for more,
Yes.
then I've already lost the battle.
Yeah.
Whether I'm in front of a live audience, giving a keynote speech, or standing in front of sixth graders, seventh grader, eighth graders, or online with graduate students, if
Yes.
I've lost them from the beginning, then there's really no hope, coming back. So, you know, fortunately, I don't teach as much as I used to. I mean, as a high school, middle school teacher, you had 25, 30 students, 5, 6 periods a day, 5 days a week, 180 days a
Yes.
year. So teaching a couple of online courses where we meet once or twice a week um, for 12 weeks or whatever, it's not the same lift in terms of the number of
Right.
students there, but it's the same kinds of challenges and the same driving principles in terms of the learning environment and my role within it. My role is to support their success, and
Yes.
supporting their success does not necessarily mean um, being the most efficient or telling them that they're wrong or being the only one who speaks.
Right.
There's a lot more to it.
Wow. I love that because it is who you are, and that you are this gift of education, and that it's in your DNA. And don't know that that's who you were as a child, perhaps, but definitely as you have had life touch you, and loss touch you, and tragedy, and have found ways to move forward. Education, putting things in context and allowing people the opportunity to see for themselves how they can interact with and make a difference. That is absolutely who you are, Dr. Darin. And I have such great respect for that. As you
Well,
are, go ahead.
I just say thank you very much. But if I'm going to say thank you to you, I want to also say thank you to Mr. Urich. He was my junior high band teacher who amazingly went on to transition to high school when I moved on to high school. Um, he was an incredible year after year after year influence for me, not only as a teenager at the time, but in terms of understanding the idea of what a person can do in terms of really engaging a class. If you are a teacher who wants to learn a good lesson about how to uh, manage and engage a class of learners, I highly recommend go search out and find your high school or middle school. If you're a public school teacher, spend some time with your band or chorus teacher, a choir teacher, whatever, um, uh, because there is something so magical about that kind of engagement that I hope that people can find that same inspiration that I always found.
That is so very true. I know that as a music teacher, I was teaching in fourth and fifth grade, and then from the point that they got to sixth all the way through, if they stayed in choir, would be with the same person. And we lived in a different district, and our daughter went to this school in the other district, and she had the same person for 6 years. And it was always amazing to watch at graduation. Dr. Joel Wilson got each graduate was given one rose to go give to a teacher. This was part of not graduation, but the couple nights before that. And Dr. Joel Wilson, year after year after year, would walk off the stage with this huge bouquet of roses from the seniors, because so many of them had walked so much life with him, and because he, like you, saw people first and then said, okay, now that this is who we are, let's see how good we can be individually and collectively. And I really appreciate what you're saying about that, because there are very, very few teachers who get that opportunity to have a total of 4 to 6 years, possibly in college if you are in an art department or something like that. But it typically really is in the arts, and maybe if you have an opportunity to be doing some kind of hands-on education, perhaps there's somebody who kind of follows along for a few years afterwards to kind of keep an eye on. But it really is those people who have that longer influence into lives.
So maybe the message is, be the kind of teacher or professor or whatever that your students would ultimately want to take your courses time after time after time after time, and um, maybe that's maybe that would change the construct in some teachers' minds in terms of this is not just a one-time exchange or interaction, that this could have a lifelong impact, a long-term impact on your students. And quite honestly, even for myself, I've gone on to hire some of my former students. I've gone on to publish with some of my former students. I've invited some of my former students to be guest lecturers in my classes. I have been hired by some of my former students to speak at their companies. I've had the privilege of attending conferences and speaking with former students. I've had the privilege of seeing some of my former students, be promoted to the highest levels of a company or even the federal government, and it's just really cool to think that you might have played some role in helping them find their way. You didn't give them the ticket, but you helped them perhaps understand what they needed in order to find and go for their own ticket.
Oh, I love that. Well, with that, Dr. Darin, we're going to say thank you so much for the gift of time that you so willingly give. And thank you for continuing to be a professor who is impacting lives at Northeastern in Boston. And I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we end this time together with such a grateful heart that there are people who continue to teach, who continue to understand their life calling. And in Simply Sarah, we desire for you to be able to find yours as well. And thank you so much for being here in this particular version of Simply Sarah.